Good morning and welcome back. The time is now 8:33 and I would like to call the October 23rd, 24th, 2025 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council back to order. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Cindy Condon,
Here.
Marcy Grail,
Here. Marcy?
I'm here.
Ann Byer,
Here.
Richard Devlin. Here. Katie Imes,
Here.
Patty Perry. Vice Chair Condon, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And are there any agenda modifications?
Not at this time.
Okay. I have the following announcements. This will be repetitive from yesterday, so bear with me. For council members and anyone addressing the council, please remember to state your name clearly and please do not use the speakerphone feature as it will create feedback. Please mute your phones, and if you are joining us by phone and receive a phone call, please hang up from this call and dial back in after finishing your other call. If you would like to address the council, please do not use the speakerphone feature because it will create feedback. For those signed onto the webinar, please do not broadcast your webcam. For agenda item E, public comment period, there are 3 ways to let us know you are interested in providing comments to council. For those in person, please fill out a registration card and submit to Nancy Hatch, who is sitting over in this corner. For those using the WebEx, you will need to use the raise your hand feature. For those on the phone only, you will need to press *3, which will alert us that you want to speak. We will go over these options again during that agenda item. If you want to receive future email notifications of council meetings, project milestones, or rulemakings through our Click Dimensions program, you can do so by clicking on the link in the agenda or on the council webpage. Please look for the green box on the right-hand side of the page that says sign up for email updates. You are also welcome to access the online project mapping tool and any documents by visiting our website. Please note that the audio and video of this meeting is being recorded and may be posted to the council's website following the meeting. Energy Facility Siting Council meetings shall be conducted in a respectful and courteous manner where everyone is allowed to state their positions at the appropriate times, consistent with council rules and procedures. Willful accusatory, offensive, insulting, threatening, insolent, or slanderous comments which disrupt the council meeting are not acceptable. Pursuant to Oregon Administrative Rule 345-011-0080, any person who engages in unacceptable conduct which disrupts the meeting may be expelled. Any questions? Thanks. So now our first item of the day is to hear about remote and electronic public meetings and hearings. It's our 5-year review, and Sarah Esterson is here to give us the review.
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon, and good morning, members of the council. Next slide, please, Nancy. So the council is statutorily required under ORS 183405 to review rules 5 years after adoption. Statute establishes the specific criteria that you have to review at that 5-year mark and then requires submitting that review via a report to the Secretary of State. So today we're conducting the 5-year review for OAR 345-015-0003, which is Council's Remote and Electronic Public Meetings and Hearings Rule. This rule was adopted 5 years ago in 2020 in response to the COVID pandemic. And just to summarize, if you're not overly familiar, this rule 345-015-0003 allows council to review whether to waive the in-person, in-proximity requirement for a public meeting or a public hearing if there is a risk to public health and safety in holding that meeting in person. And the department otherwise makes participation in that meeting available through other means, phone and WebEx. Just wanted to note, this rule does not apply to meetings and hearings that are established in statute, and that would be specific to a draft proposed order public hearing on an application for site certificate like you experienced last night. That in-person and proximity requirement is established in statute. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. That was the next slide. Yeah, I already covered that one. There we go. Okay. So since 2020, the council has not actually been asked to apply this rule. However, it is our recommendation to maintain the rule in its current language to ensure there's flexibility to evaluate whether that in-person and proximity obligation should be waived due to risk to public health and safety if the circumstances are warranted. And as I mentioned, this 5-year review needs to address certain criteria, so we'll go through that now. Next slide, please, Nancy. Okay, so these bullets on the slide, those are the criteria established in statute. We'll just briefly go through them. So the first question or criteria is, has the rule achieved its intended purpose? Again, council hasn't applied it, but yes, we do believe that it's achieved its purpose of minimizing public health and safety risk by allowing an option to consider whether to waive the in-person and proximity requirement. The next question, is the rule still needed? Our recommendation is yes. The council has at least 12 meetings every year. We believe that even though the rule hasn't been used in the last 5 years, the presence of it is necessary and valuable in the event of an emergency circumstance. The next criteria is, should the rule be repealed, amended, or left unchanged? No, we don't believe it should be repealed, amended, or changed. There are no identified deficiencies, conflicts, no amendments to the rules identified by staff. Next question or criteria, has the rule had any unintended effects? Again, hasn't been used, but we don't believe there's been any administrative burden, fiscal impact, or unintended policy consequence of having this rule in place. And lastly, has this rule harmonized with other applicable rules? And yes, we believe there are no conflicts with the rule language when compared to other relevant public meetings, rules, or statutes. Oh, and then is there a fiscal or economic impact since adoption? No, we haven't identified any fiscal impact. Okay. And we're already at your opportunity to make the decision. It is our recommendation as presented in the staff report that council approve this analysis and concur so that we may move forward and file the report with Secretary of State. So I'll hand it over to the floor for deliberation.
Thank you, Ms. Esterson, for that report. And I would just say, in reviewing the materials, we didn't use this during COVID. It's all a blur, COVID. So can you remind me what we did during COVID?
Sure. For the record, Todd Cornett. No, we didn't have this in place. It was kind of near the end of COVID. So, but it's again, could be COVID, could be some other, big health issue, could be weather. In the summer, it could be fire. In the winter, it could be storms. So, the idea obviously is to give us that flexibility, but no, we never actually used it. And with COVID, we still maintain those in-person public hearings, but most people were remote. So I think all the council members were remote, and then we would just only bring out the minimum number of staff to be able to run the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And while I was reviewing, it was the thought process, I think, was prompted by we had a health emergency, and it is pretty effective. I mean, I think we have found remote pretty effective. Having said that, I think the council is really committed to going out to where people have an interest in the project and meeting personally. And so this is in no way intended to lessen our travel to where these sites are proposed. So.
Yeah.
And
Vice Chair Condon, if I
Yeah.
may. Yeah, and I think like last night, we talked about that with the new amendment rules. These are different rules than what we're talking about. They kind of achieve the same thing, but they relate to different, different elements. And so, what we talked about last night, getting the straw poll, we don't take those lightly. We believe absolutely in the same thing is, our preference is to be out there. If there is, we believe value to being out there. If we are going to have people who want to show up and participate and communicate directly to council, there's absolutely kind of the value and need. So we only want to do that when, again, maybe we're not going to have, any participation, at least that's our forecast, or obviously, if there's any kind of dangerous situation.
And I do think council members ourselves have experienced the difference between remote and being with our colleagues. And it is quite different. So anyway, with that, I think we're ready for a motion. Councillor Byer.
I move that we approve the 5-year analysis of the administrative rule relating to remote and electronic public meetings as recommended in the staff report.
Is there a second?
This is Marcy. I second that motion.
Councillor Grail has seconded the motion, and any discussion? Mr. Secretary, can you call the vote?
Ann Byer,
Yeah.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Marcy Grail,
Yes.
Patty Perry,
Yes.
Katie Imes.
Yes.
Motion carries, Vice Chair Condon.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And now on to the next item. So the Climate Trust Annual Audit Update and Annual Report, and Secretary Cornett, Assistant Director for Siting Council, will provide an overview of the 2024 financial audit. And I think Kyler Sherry is with us today remotely. She is the Climate Trust Program Manager, and she'll provide an annual overview of the Climate Trust.
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. For the record, Todd Cornett, Assistant Director for Siting and Council Secretary. So yeah, this is an annual update. So my portion of it will be very short, and then we'll go into probably the more interesting part, where Ms. Sherry will give you an update on the Climate Trust activities. You have a staff report from me on the first part of it, and then you have the slides from Ms. Sherry on the other part. So a little bit of background, the carbon standard for Energy Facility Siting Council was the first in the nation. It was established, in the 90s. And basic idea is that projects, natural gas power plants, some others that produce carbon have an obligation to offset some of the carbon that they produce. I won't go into the details on that because it's quite complicated. And we've done that when we do an update to aspects of the carbon standard. But as part of the carbon standard, a little more background, House Bill 2021, which was established by the legislature in 2021, precludes new natural gas power plants. However, we have 9 natural gas power plants in council jurisdiction. They continue to operate. They continue to be subject to the carbon standard. There are also non-generating facilities that will be subject to the carbon standard as well. So what we're doing today, even though natural gas in Oregon currently, is limited in terms of new production, there is still value to retain the carbon standard, still value, to kind of do what we've been doing, and for the Climate Trust to do what they've been doing. So with that said, as part of the carbon standard, one of the options that a certificate holder can do is provide the forecasted dollar amount for the life of the facility for the carbon that they have to offset. Calculations, they say we're going to be in business for 30 years. How much carbon are they going to produce annually? And then how much do they actually have to offset annually? Then times 30 equals this sort of monetary offset rate or amount. All of the certificate holders have opted into the one option, which is to provide money to the Climate Trust. There are a couple other options. None of them have ever chosen that. This is the single option that all of the developers have chosen. And so the council has to have a qualified organization to offtake those monies and to apply them to offset projects. And Sherry will give you much more detail on this. As relevant to like what I'm talking about today is in order to maintain the status of a qualified organization, and the Climate Trust has been the only one that's ever been that for the council and the standard. To maintain that, there are several things that they have to do. One of them is what I'm going to talk about today. And that is, and I'll read this verbatim, to continue to be recognized as a qualified organization for the purposes of receiving funds to produce the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions necessary to meet the carbon emission standard associated with energy facilities that emit carbon dioxide. Among other things, the Climate Trust must comply with ORS 469-403 sub 2, sub E, sub N, sub 4. So basically, even though it's in your rule, most of the requirement comes from statute. So here's the actual quote: has made available on an annual basis beginning after the first year of operation a signed opinion of an independent certified public accountant stating that the qualified organization's use of funds pursuant to this statute conforms with generally accepted accounting procedures, except that the qualified organization shall have 1 year to conform with generally accepted accounting principles in the event of a non-conforming audit. So you have the staff report, you have the audit, which was provided to us and I provided to you. So that report, which was submitted on September 11th, which is a report of the independent auditors and consolidated financial statements, Climate Trust and subsidiary. The dates referred to December 31st, 2024 and all of 2023. And then specifically, this was done by the Moss Adams, which is a public accounting firm. And in their, what is it? And off the page number. But essentially early on in their report, it states, in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Climate Trust and subsidiary as of December 31st, 2024 and 2023. And the changes in their net assets and their cash flows for the years that then ended in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. So just wanted to read that to make sure that it was all clearly in the record. The short of it is, yes, for this one particular criterion, which they're obligated to meet annually to maintain their status as a qualified organization, they have done that. And proof is in the information I just provided and was submitted to you. So with that, that concludes my portion, unless council members have any questions about this particular element of the presentation.
Thank you, Secretary Cornett. Councillor Grail, Councillor Imes, any questions, comments?
Have none. This is Marcy.
No comments.
Thank you. In the room? So I do have a comment and really a question or clarifying. We get to talk about this topic once a year with this report. And then when we talk about the offsets, the amount of charge for offsets, and can you remind us by statute the amount that we is set to buy offsets is set by statute, right?
Well, so again, this is where it gets a little
Or the
complicated.
process.
Yeah, the process is set in statute. So again, that was done in the 1990s. But there are two sort of triggers. One is the monetary offset rate, and then one is the efficiency rate. So both of those things, which are established in statute, council does have the opportunity to update every 2 years. And so that's where we had not updated the monetary offset rate for some time, and we're still kind of in a catch-up mode on that. And so part of it is what's the market rate for carbon, purchasing carbon offsets. So, we want to make sure that we're updating, that particular element, as frequently as we can now, and that's every 2 years, and we'll continue to do that. The other one is the efficiency rate. And what that gets to is the amount that the developer has to offset starts with what's the efficiency of the facility. And the idea is that council looks at that every once in a while, and then you change that efficiency rate because natural gas power plants become more efficient. So, 20 years ago, they were efficient. 10 years ago, they were more efficient. And so the heat rate changes. And what that does is it means so the requirement is that they have to offset 17% below the most efficient gas plant that's out there, in the United States, if the council standard has been pegged to that. If we don't change that, technically they may have the most efficient gas plant out there and we didn't change it in a long time. They may have no carbon to offset because it's 17% below that. So that's why that's an important one for us to keep an eye on. Again, not that we can allow for new gas power plants, but we'll still do that because the legislature could change, that at any point in time as well. So like I said, it's a little bit complicated and it's easier to have like on a slide where we can kind of show all of the way that those triggers work. But it is important that we update those as frequently as we need to.
Yes, Councillor Byer.
Thank you. Just a quick question on efficiency. I don't remember discussing that before, but I just don't remember things. So I know when we dealt with the MIST natural gas storage facility, there was some increase in, help me here, throughput or the amount of natural gas moving through the system. In that case, would the efficiency standard apply? I don't remember discussing it, and maybe we can schedule a 15-minute briefing on what that does and what actual effect it has. But that would be helpful.
Yeah, so they have compressor stations, and so they have big generators for the compressor stations or big turbines for that. And those are non-generating facilities. So the standards are a little bit different for, generating facilities versus non-generating facilities. But it's the same concept that we need to make sure, that we're updating those standards. So again, that we're being able to apply that carbon standard, to the maximum extent that we can based upon, what the statutes and rules allow.
Well, it's changing,
Yeah, and they were obligated to meet that requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you. And like Councillor Byer, I don't remember ever dealing with that component, but we are regularly dealing with the carbon offset rate.
Yeah, the last time we did the rulemaking, it was just the monetary offset rate.
Right.
The prior time, which has been a few years now, was we dealt with both. It was the efficiency rate and the monetary offset rate.
Thanks. And just to remind people, the amount we can raise the offset rate is limited by statute as well. And so we are playing catch up. So thank you for the report and thank you to the Climate Trust. And now we have Kyler Sherry somewhere.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay, great.
loud and clear.
Awesome. I'm chiming in from Colorado. Oh, I was trying to start the video, but I think I messed it up. Okay, well, I'll just go then. Yeah, thanks everyone for allowing me to present. I am sorry, I keep getting all these things about the camera now. I'm presenting on behalf of the Climate Trust, our 2025 annual report to FSEC. This is one of our requirements as being the qualified organization. Am I able to click next slide, or do I just request next slide?
Just request next
Okay,
slide.
next slide, please. Yeah, so brief outline. I'm going to give a quick background about the Climate Trust. a few updates on the voluntary carbon market. Where is it at today in 2025 and changes that we're seeing? And then give an update on the status of the Oregon CO2 standard. Next slide, please. The Climate Trust, our mission is to utilize carbon markets to scale natural climate solutions. We have 27 years of experience. We are the oldest carbon market entity in the United States and also one of the only nonprofit carbon offset entities in the United States. We were founded in 1997 under the Oregon CO2 standard as the qualified organization to distribute the offset funds that we receive. So we started off more as a managed regulatory offset acquisition program working for the CO2 standard. And then since 1997, we have kind of had two phases of growth. The first phase was we became more of a financer in voluntary carbon offset projects, and we're involved in as being an intermediary providing offsets to different buyers of carbon credits in the voluntary and compliance markets, whether those are Fortune 500 companies or small individual buyers or local municipalities. And then starting around like 2015 and on, we pivoted to be a carbon offset developer. So our focus now is on developing improved forest management projects, reforestation projects, and projects that avoid grassland conversion to cropland. We still provide offsets from different sectors, including landfill gas, dairy digesters, composting, all sorts of different types of offsets in the voluntary market. So to date, we've provided $107 million in carbon offset finance to projects, mostly with a focus in the United States. But actually this year, we just started 2 projects up in Canada. So while it is Canada, it is still our first international projects that we are doing. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just brief overview on what the voluntary carbon market is. The voluntary carbon market is a tool for corporations and other entities to purchase offsets to help meet their climate action plans beyond what they cannot reduce internally. So the governing body, because it is a voluntary market, but there is a governing body, those are called registries. Registries develop the methodologies that we as developers use to quantify the climate impacts of various voluntary carbon offset projects. These registries are nonprofits to help avoid any conflicts of interest and bias. All of the methodologies that they develop are peer-reviewed and science-based, and they continually go through updates. So all of the protocols that we work with in the Climate Trust, they are every few years being updated to meet the highest standards of science and the market. A really key integral part of the offsets, particularly the offsets that we provide to the Oregon CO2 standard, is that they all must go through a third-party audit. They all follow ISO standards. And so that audit is actually a group that is outside of the registries, and they come out and make sure that the projects are following the rules set by the registries and the methodology themselves. The carbon market, who participates in it, is growing. The Oregon CO2 standard was really one of a kind back in its day, and now it has become a much larger ecosystem of not only project developers in these registries, but we now see consultants and rating agencies participating. Rating agencies, I think that they're the newest participant in the voluntary carbon market to come to light in the past couple of years. And they are independent organizations that look at projects and rate them on a project level with basic ratings from like A to D to help guide buyers when evaluating project types. Rating agencies can be a little confusing at times, though, because not all of them follow the same standard for rating. So it's really important that you understand how the rating agency views a project when you're observing what they rate. So some of them will really only look at the co-benefits of a project or the communities that they work with, while some of them will look more at the quantification to determine the carbon offset value. So the Oregon CO2 standard works with 3 registries. They are Verra and ACR. Those 2 registries have a lot of international projects and also projects based in the United States, and also the Climate Action Reserve, which has projects in the United States and Mexico mainly. Next slide, please. So in the past couple of years, a term that has become really popular in the voluntary carbon market is improving integrity. So at this stage, it's well established with the registries of who's developing protocols, but what now groups are looking for is how to improve those. And that's where the integrity of growing that in the market comes from. There are 4 main ways that organizations are trying to improve integrity. They are the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative, and Science-Based Targets Initiative. So they all kind of sound similar, and they're all looking to achieve a similar goal. But the one that I think impacts the voluntary carbon offset market the most, interacts with the CO2 standard, is the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets. So what they're doing is they're looking at a methodology level to ensure that methodologies achieve what they came up with as core carbon principles. So core carbon principles, those labels just started coming out in the past couple of years, and we look to supply offsets to the Oregon program into the future that have that core carbon principle label. Next slide, please. So kind of with the Climate Trust mission, which is to pilot new project types and also to help get projects off the ground that meet these new standards, we launched a reforestation program in 2023. To date, there are very few voluntary carbon offsets that have come from reforestation projects. One of the main reasons for that is reforestation projects have very high upfront costs to get seedlings in the ground post wildfire and post disturbance. And then once you get them in the ground, it is a very long time, minimum 15 years before you start issuing carbon offsets to pay back those upfront costs to get the seedlings in the ground. So that's where we're trying to come up with different funding sources to get these programs going. And as a nonprofit, we feel like we have a niche to make that happen. So our focus with our reforestation program is to demonstrate that carbon can be used as a tool to reforest post-wildfire. Especially in Oregon, we're looking at projects there that then can be turned into a timber model 60 years down the line. So it's providing resiliency for landowners that land might have been disturbed. And the reforestation protocol just this summer received CCP label. So we're hopeful that we can plant 25,000 acres by 2028 and start growing a reforestation program in Oregon, but then also all across the country. Next slide, please. I also wanted to flag a couple of new offset project types that we are looking into. I think over the past couple of years, we've provided offsets to the Oregon CO2 standard from landfill gas, dairy digesters, and forestry project were our main focus. So now that there are more project types coming online that are financially feasible due to the increase in pricing that we're seeing, we are now looking at biochar as one. Biochar is when you take agricultural or forestry byproducts and you heat it through pyrolysis to create biochar. And through that pyrolysis process, the carbon that was in the biomass waste gets trapped and stored in perpetuity forever. Then the biochar is applied to either forest lands or agricultural lands to help with soil fertility. And then also it has been shown to increase carbon sequestration. Biochar, those credits are worth well over $100. I realistically actually should have put 200 in there now as the price per credit. Very few biochar credits have issued from Oregon to date. So we have not used we have not gone through contracting any biochar offsets for the program. One, mainly because of the price, but then also there are just not many out there right now. The other offset type that we are tracking is low carbon cement. So this is a project type that uses supplementary cement materials to replace Portland cement. So last year we actually entered into a contract to purchase 15,000 offsets from a low carbon cement project that is located in Lakeview, Oregon. And it uses volcanic materials as opposed to limestone and clay. And that cement will actually be used in a building project up in Portland, Oregon. So we constantly are looking for projects, that can support rural areas. So that's why we're really excited about this one. And it's going to be the first type of this credit issued in Oregon. The other offset type that is becoming more prevalent in the market this year and last year is plugging orphaned oil and gas wells. This methodology uses carbon credits as a way to pay for the plugging of these wells that are slowly leaking methane emissions. So we're trying to fulfill a gap in funding, because when these wells are abandoned and there's no clear owner of who was the well that abandoned them, lots of times the cost to cap will fall on local and federal government agencies, and they may not have the funding to make that happen. There are over 130,000 abandoned wells with no known owner in the United States. I had a hard time finding that number specifically for Oregon, but we do know that there are some projects coming online right now in Oregon of this project type that we are going to evaluate for the program. Next slide, please. I just wanted to show this. I every year kind of put up the one report that the voluntary carbon market really has that shows changes in pricing over time. So on the right column, all the way over, you will see that between 2023 and 2024, forestry and nature-based carbon offset projects saw a decrease in volume and price. I would say that there's two main reasons for that. One is that the market, buyers in the market were really waiting for that core carbon principle label to come out before engaging on offset projects. So they kind of held back on making purchasing commitments. The other reason why is, I think, this is hard to quantify, but political headwinds are resulting in a dampened market. So a lot of medium to larger size buyers in the market are pulling back and rethinking carbon offsets as part of their climate action plans, and also at the scale that they want to engage. One positive note from last year was in 2024, landfill gas projects were one of the project types that got a core carbon principle label. And those offsets, as a result, saw a 35% increase in price. So we try our best to supply the Oregon CO2 standard with those credit types. We have supplied landfill gas with that label to the program. And then just this summer, so pretty recently, core carbon principles labeled reforestation and improved forest management as approved. So more offsets within the whole program will have this label going forward, but the label doesn't apply retroactively. So we just know that those offsets that have been supplied to the program would have received it if the label had come out earlier in recent years. Next slide, please. So kind of went into this before, but just brief overview how the Climate Trust works with the Oregon CO2 standard. The standard requires new fossil fuel fire facilities or facilities are expanding to mitigate their plans' projected CO2 emissions over a 30-year time horizon. So what they're what they are required to achieve is CO2 emission reductions that are 17% below the most efficient baseload natural gas fired power plant. And we at the Climate Trust are the qualified organization that the facilities have all chosen to route to go to meet this compliance, which provides us funds to go out and purchase carbon offsets on the facility's behalf. So I kind of think as the Climate Trust, our role is a fiduciary of the monetary pathway is how I describe it. Next slide, please. So what is our role? So we have to commit 80% of funds received go to the purchase of carbon offsets. 60% of the offset funds that we receive must be committed within 2 years of the construction date or the expansion date of the facility. We can spend no more than 20% on management. What falls into that management bucket is lawyer fees for contracting to purchase the carbon offsets, time spent on evaluating the carbon offset projects that we're looking at, and maybe any consulting work that we need to pay for, which we haven't had to do in a while. And then just the process of working with the registries as well to get the carbon offsets issued, especially if we're managing the issuance process. We also must retire the carbon offsets on behalf of the Oregon program. And then every year I submit to the specific facilities their annual reports. Most of the facilities have completed their obligations, so I only do about 3 a year now. And also I must give this annual presentation and submit our annual audit to be in compliance as a qualified organization. Next slide, please. So an overview of the performance by facility. We have to date obligated 88% of funds. We will obligate $3 million by the end of 2027. And the last time I presented, we only had $2 million left to obligate, but that went up by $1 million this summer because the Northwest Natural Miller facility had to give us another payment. So that's why that increased. There wasn't there wasn't no contractual reason like a de-obligation, which caused that number to increase. So I just wanted to call that out. Our average lifetime carbon offset price is $6.20. And then last year, our average 2024 price is $21.29. So a significant, difference between the lifetime of the program and then what we saw last year. I expect those prices to go down a little bit this year in new project types that we are going to be committing to the program. And to date, 33% of offsets that have been paid for by the program have come from Oregon-based projects. I will say I am excited because I do see a lot more projects coming online from the state of Oregon right now. So my hope is that we can increase that money to use Oregon dollars within the state of Oregon. And not just Oregon, then the Pacific Northwest. Next slide, please. So the spend down of a program, this is our plan over the next 2 years, obligate and spend $3 million by the end of 2026. And I realize I wrote that a little bit in error. We need to obligate $3 million by the end of 2026. And then that means have the cash go out by the end of 2027. So there's normally a delay in us entering into a contract before the offsets issue, and then we retire them. So the word obligate and then retirement are used a little differently. We will continue to look for high quality projects in Oregon and the Pacific Northwest, specifically with that core carbon principle label. And also want to look for opportunities to use carbon finance for new carbon offset sectors, whether they are in urban or rural parts of Oregon. Next slide, please. I just wanted to highlight, a project that the dollars have supported. So one project is the Longview Forestry Project, which is located in Kimberly, Oregon. The Climate Trust entered into a 3-year offtake agreement for 111,000 credits from this project, using for the Oregon facilities. What this project does is it allows the landowner to avoid a typical harvest regime in the region. So they are reducing how often they have timber harvest to maintain their carbon stock above what is common practice in the region. And then they will also use these funds, though, to continue non-commercial harvest to increase forest health and resiliency. And part of that will include thinning to reduce density in overstocked forest stands. So it's one way of demonstrating that this program really does provide significant funding to rural areas in Oregon. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the structure of the Climate Trust. I wanted to put this up here to show that we have grown in the past couple of years, which provides resiliency to us as an organization, not just as an offset supplier, but also an offset developer in the market, and the ability to continue to participate in methodology making and then also policy changes. We had plans to hire 2 more staff this year under federal grants that we had received, but those are currently on pause. So hiring 2 more forestry experts might happen at the end of next year or possibly next year, depending on how that funding goes. Next slide, please. Yeah, and that's it for my presentation. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, thank you for the time though, and let me present on the Oregon CO2 standard.
Thank you, Ms. Cherry, for that comprehensive report. Are there any questions or comments from the council? Councillor Devlin.
This may be a, yes. Swallow the mic. This may be a question both for staff and for Sherry. I was just looking here. Sometimes when I hear something, I just look to the iPad and look it up.
Mhm.
And I was familiar before with simple cycle and multi-cycle gas plants. Difference being this, the simple cycle just utilizes directly gas. The multi-cycle actually uses the exhaust to generate more power after you've generated the first level. So it ends up losing less energy. Now, is there a differentiation in our standard of 17% below the most efficient, differentiating between those 2 types of plants? Because the multi-cycle would always, the simple cycle could never be the lowest because the multi-cycle is significantly higher. Does our standard differentiate between those 2? Not that it should, but.
Yeah, for the record, Todd Cornett, I'll take a stab at that. I don't think so, just because, again, it's the most efficient gas plant. And frankly, I don't think developers are going to probably, if anybody wanted to build a new gas plant, why would they do, a simple cycle versus a combined cycle? Because a combined cycle, as you say, you have like the main generator, and then, the sort of, heat kind of comes off of that, and they run it through another turbine, and it just creates more power for them. So it may be more expensive, but I'm sure the payback is pretty fast. So I doubt anybody would come in, even if they could. They can't at this point. With a new gas plant, I doubt they would come in with a simple cycle, just because you just get literally a lot more bang for your buck with a combined cycle. Even though I'm sure it's more expensive to purchase, you're going to produce more consistent power, you're going to have more efficiency, and it's going to be a better option in the long run.
Yeah, and I think what I was just reading is it doesn't really make financial sense to take a simple cycle and convert it to a combined cycle, because the cost would be so great to do it. Plus, in our region, particularly in Oregon and Washington, California also, they're only going to be allowed to continue to use the gas plants for so many years. So to make that sort of financial investment wouldn't make any financial sense. I don't know if our most recent gas plants were
For a combined cycle.
they're combined.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Education.
And thank you for the research, Councillor Devlin. Any other questions or comments from council? Checking with you,
Marcy.
Councillor Grail and Imes.
Yes, this is Marcy. I have a question. Or
Yes.
Ms. Sherry, you indicated that you had to delay hiring additional staff as planned because of, are there other impacts that you see from the things that are happening? Are you going to be affected?
Yeah, from our grants, we don't see anything being affected. I think what we will be affected, but I think this is the greater voluntary market. We will be affected by maybe some corporations electing to not purchase offsets because they are nervous about the reputational risk right now when I think organizations are being asked to stop having DEI or ESG policies, and this falls in the ESG policy realm. So that could be a risk to the organization of having a difficult time maybe selling credits. But luckily, we have multiple funding sources as an organization, and we still have long-term commitments with many corporations, Fortune 500, Fortune 50, and much smaller, who have told us that they're going to continue purchasing credits. So I think that we'll be able to weather that storm if there is a lag in the market over the next couple of years.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Based off of what we heard last night, I was just curious. Appreciate the work that you and your organization do.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah. It's an interesting time for sure, but I think we're going to be resilient.
Thank you, Councillor Grail. Thank you, Ms. Sherry. And Councillor Ines, any comment or question?
Nope, just thank you, Kyler, for your presentation. It was very educating and thorough. Thank you.
Thank you. One last call for comments or questions.
Vice Chair Condon?
Yes.
I do have one more note. So one of the things that we didn't talk about was one of the other responsibilities of the Energy Facility Siting Council for a qualified organization is they have to have a body that helps decide where those offsets are going to go, where money comes in, Climate Trust needs to purchase offsets. So who does that? There is the Oregon Offset Committee of the Climate Trust, and that's the body that helps determine where those monies get spent. The council's obligation is to appoint 3 people to that. And while the obligation is not that there be a council member, there has historically been a council member. And I just wanted to point out that Vice Chair Condon is that council member that has been on the Oregon Offset Committee for some time. And thank you for your additional efforts on that.
Pleasure. And I learn something every time that group meets. So, and partly due to the work of the Climate Trust. So, or mostly due to the work of the Climate Trust. So thank you, Ms. Sherry. I think that wraps it up for us here. So we have a break scheduled in our agenda at this time, but we could move on to public comment.
We are running a little bit early, so to council's pleasure.
Anyone ready for a break, or should we just move on to public comment? Comment? Fabulous. This time we'll move on to our public comment period. And at this time is reserved for the public to address the council regarding any item within council jurisdiction that is not otherwise closed for comment. While the written public comment timeframe for the Yellow Rosebush Energy Project is open until November 3rd at 5 p.m., the opportunity to provide oral comments concluded at the end of last night's public hearing. So we cannot take any public comments on that during today's public comment period. In the agenda, we have set the amount of time for individual commenters at 7 minutes. Nancy, do we have any comment cards or raised hands on the webinar or phone for comment? Nothing. Anyone in the room want to make comments today? We're ready, willing, and able to listen. So. Well, with that, our public comment period is pretty short.
All right, well, just to be sure, if you are on the line, if you're on WebEx, at the bottom of your screen, there's a participant window. You're going to click on that to raise your hand if you'd like to make a comment. When you are finished, you would click it again to lower your hand. If you're on the phone, you're going to press *3 on your telephone keypad and then *3 again when you are finished commenting. So we'll give a few seconds here to see if anyone raises a hand.
Ready? Okay, it doesn't appear that we have any hands raised. So last call for questions or comments. Okay, thank you. Thank you all. So the next item is the Boardman to Hemingway quarterly construction update. We can take a break if we want or move on. Take break. So we are going to take a quick break. Quick break, 10 minutes. Okay, we will reconvene at in 10 minutes. Thank you. All right, it is 9:38 and we will continue with our agenda. Next up is an update on the Boardman to Hemingway quarterly construction. And today we have with us Wally Adams, Senior Technical Expert, and Sarah Esterson, Senior Operations and Policy Analyst, to give that report.
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon, members of the council. So for the record, I'm Wally Adams. I work for Haley and Aldrich. So before I jump into the slides, I'll just explain that we're a contractor who does work on behalf of the Oregon Department of Energy. We support them in a variety of ways, primarily for compliance though. So I'm acting basically as the project manager for compliance on this project that we're going to talk about today. So I'll cover, and I'm moving them on my screen, but I need to ask you to move them on that screen. Sorry, Nancy. So what I'm going to cover today, we'll talk about just what the status is of construction on this project, an overview of the compliance process, site inspections that we've conducted to date and what the results have been, compliance issues that we've noted to date, and also what the process is for resolving those, and then we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. So next slide, if you could, Nancy. So just an overview and reminder for everybody what this project is. So it is a big transmission line project, approximately 273 miles in Oregon of 500 kilovolt transmission line. Includes a couple substations, communication stations, and a lot of access roads. I think they say that this project, they'll joke that it's a road building project that masks as a transmission line project, because to build the transmission line, you have to build a lot of roads to be able to access the sites where you're putting the towers. Multi-use areas, pulling and tensioning sites for when they actually string the line. So there's a lot of things other than just setting the towers that are involved in a project like this. So it goes through 5 counties in Oregon: Morrow, Umatilla, Union, Baker, and Malheur. So how do they build a transmission line? I've simplified it a little bit here, but there's, to me, 6 main steps. They start by clearing. They have to clear, and that's that kind of top left picture, have to clear the route in some places. So in Union County, for example, there are some forested areas, which is different from other FSEC projects. I'll say you typically don't deal with that, but there is some of that on this project. They have to build access roads, and then the pads for the structures. Those have to be cleared and leveled. And then they get into setting the foundations. For many of those, that's pouring concrete for the piers. They also have other ways, though, that they do foundations without concrete. It just depends on the geology and what's required from a geotechnical standpoint. Then they put up the towers. So you see, a picture there with a crane of them putting together. They call them Lego pieces as they're assembling and bolting and lifting these things into place. eventually they get to pull the wire and basically complete the project. And after that, of course, they're doing reclamation of the areas that were only temporarily disturbed, not permanent disturbance areas.
Vice Chair Condon,
Yes.
for the record, Todd Cornett, I just have a quick question. Just to confirm, the photos on the screen are from the Boardman Hemingway project.
Actually, thank you, Mr. Cornett. These photos are not from this project. These are typical because of course they haven't gotten to all these stages yet with this project. I just wanted to show what it looks like for representation purposes. I will later have a number of photos from this project that I will show you that I just took within the last couple days.
Counselor Byer.
Following up on that question, is the tower design this lattice style or is it monotone?
So it depends. In the area, some of them are lattice, some of them are H-frame, and it depended. I think that was dictated in some cases by visual impacts or trying to reduce visual impacts, and they would choose a different tower design in some cases. Okay, so let's talk about the status of the project. They've worked in primarily 3 counties to date and are just starting in a 4th. So it's Malheur, Baker, and Morrow counties where they've done some work. And I'm just going to show you about where that's been. So I know it's a little hard to see on these pictures, but kind of center left of this one for Malheur County is Vail. You'd have Ontario over then to the right or to the east of that. And the work they've done in Malheur County has basically been concentrated in a couple areas just to the north and just to the south of Vail. And that's where most of the work that they've done so far has been, is in those areas. In Baker County, they have a couple of areas also. Thank you, Nancy. So that's near Pleasant Valley, and then also a little bit to the east of the Rye Valley is where they've done some work. And that we'll talk, and I'll show some pictures of that area to the east of the Rye Valley. It's very mountainous, and so they're having some challenges there. In Morrow County, it's been basically to either side of Bombing Range Road. There's a section that runs from west to east there, east to west, I guess, depending on your viewpoint. And they've been working in that area. So next slide. So just then to kind of summarize the progress, they met the threshold, the FSEC threshold for start of construction as of July 10th. They actually started some work in June, but July 10th was the date where they notified Odo to say, we've passed this $250,000 threshold that marks the start of construction for FSEC purposes, the purposes of their site certificate. I mentioned the counties they're in. And then this just gives you, this chart gives you some idea how far along are they. So, and this was as of October 12th, you know, and of course, these numbers are changing every day. But at that point, they had completed about 8% of the roads, 15% of the pad sites, just a few of the pulling and tensioning sites and multi-use areas, as they call them. Foundation, 6%. They did not at that point have any structures that were fully erected. They do now. I think they have at least one, and you'll see again some pictures as they're starting to put these things up. The forecast is, of course, they've started, as it says here, limited start where access is available, and it's an important subpoint there that they don't have everything for Section 106 for cultural resources finalized. It's pretty well known what the eligibility determinations are and what will need to be done to protect any eligible resources, but those documents have not been all reviewed and signed off by everybody. who's involved in the process. So they're taking precautions basically, and taking a conservative approach that any resources, where final determinations haven't been made, whether they believe they're going to be, the conclusion will be that they're eligible or not, they're protecting those basically and putting up boundaries around them, giving them 200-foot buffers and not going into those buffers. So then looking forward, the peak build years will be the next 2 years, 2026 and 2027. They expect to be, sorry, I think I've got the wrong year in there. Substantial completion should be October 2027. Sorry about that. And then final completion would be in August of 2028, meaning everything, including reclamation, should be done at that point. But energization should be in 2027. So let's talk about compliance and how the compliance process works. Nancy, you can go ahead to the next slide. So to me, this is the cadence that we go through, and it starts with weekly reporting. And I'll have a slide just on that because it's an important piece. But we get a weekly report from the developer's environmental contractor, their inspector, and I have another slide to talk about that and how that works. But that weekly report gives us a lot of information about what the activities are, where they're working, monitoring activities, any issues they've run into, and so forth. So I get that report every week. I'm able to review that. And then on Wednesday, we have a Teams call with all the people involved. And it's the developer, Idaho Power, their environmental contractor, Eocene. Some of their construction folks are involved in that call as well. And we have a set agenda and we're reviewing, where are you working? What are the monitoring activities? What are you finding? What are the issues you're running into? Following up on past issues that have been identified, and anything else important that needs to be discussed at that point in time. Sometimes they have issues that they're running into that they need to raise and talk to us about. So those first two things are very important, and they happen every week. So there's non-compliance tracking that's involved here too. We'll cover that more in detail later. There are monthly inspections that we conduct on behalf of Odo. And I have a slide on that, so I won't go into that too much just this moment, but know that those are happening, and they're happening every month and have been since construction started. In addition to that, the developer or certificate holder is required to submit, this is required by rule, to submit a semi-annual construction progress report. We haven't received the first one yet, but we will in a couple of months here, where they report on what's happening. And then outside of the normal cadence, if there were a complaint or an issue that were raised, people can contact me directly. They also may contact Odo, and then those things would be usually referred over to me to investigate and find out what's going on. We also get notifications if there is something else that happens. So if they have a spill or some other incident where they should be notifying us more quickly than they're doing that. So let's talk about the organization here with respect to compliance, because this is a big project. It crosses federal lands. And so there's more than just the state's interests involved here and people representing the state. But let's start with the certificate holder then. Idaho Power has this environmental inspection contractor, EIC, we call them, and that's Eocene. And they have boots on the ground, and a lot of them basically everywhere where construction activities are occurring. I'll say round numbers today, they have about 20 people in the field. That's expected to grow, I'm told, probably at least 40, could be more by the time we get into next year. So, and when you see the scale though of the work and how much area is being worked in and ground disturbed, you understand, because it sounds like a lot of people. It is, but there's a lot of area that's involved here. And what are they doing? Well, they're monitoring basically everything, environmental, cultural, biological resources to make sure that the construction activities are protecting those, that they're following the terms and conditions of the site certificate and the plan of development as it's known, which is their equivalent from the federal side. So kind of moving over then and talking about the federal side. So the Bureau of Land Management also has a stake in this, and they have a contractor who they've hired that's called the Construction Inspection Contractor. And that is for this project, Power Engineers. And they have another team of people, boots on the ground, who are out there monitoring activities. What their interest is in making sure that things are being done compliant with federal laws, and in particular, the Endangered Species Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, protections for eagles, Section 106, that's a huge one, the cultural resources, paleontological resources, and then some other things, noxious weeds, for example, they're interested in, hazardous materials handling, and fire protection, to name a few. So they're another key component, and they are, I'll say, mostly interested in federal lands managed by BLM, but it's not strictly that. So those first few things that I mentioned, endangered species, migratory birds, eagles, Section 106, they're interested in that for the whole length of the line, regardless of whether it's public or private lands that are being crossed.
Councillor Byer.
And I should know this, but I can't remember. Is BLM also responsible for forest lands? I know there were a couple Forest Service properties involved in the project. Are they the lead agency for federal lands management issues?
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Byer. They are if it's BLM land, if it's federal land. And if it's not, I'm not so sure. I would actually have to defer that. I haven't had to get into that yet for this. But that's just starting now as they get into Union County and having to get into some clearing of forested lands. As I mentioned earlier, it's a new one for these projects. And so I think have learned some things as we get into that one.
Thank you, Secretary Cornett.
For the record, Todd Cornett. I don't have an absolute answer to the question, but when this is going on, the BLM was the lead federal agency, but the Forest Service also kind of had their own review. I don't know that they entirely, defaulted to the BLM's review, and then the military as well, because then you got the Borman bombing range. So they kind of did their own, they all sort of did their own NEPA review-ish, even though BLM was the lead federal agency. So I'm not sure how this will all play out in construction, and kind of monitoring. So it will be interesting to get future updates to see, to really get into your question.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And since we have interrupted, I'm just checking with councilors online. Any questions or comments?
This is Marcy, and no comment, and I would just like to remind anyone, while I know this is information, I do recuse myself from this agenda item, anything associated with Boardman and Hemingway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Grail. Councilor Imes?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so just finishing up on this slide to the right, last but not least, the Oregon Department of Energy and FSEC, they should have probably added in there. And that is who, of course, I and my company are representing as your compliance contractor basically on this project. And we're monitoring all of the terms and conditions of the site certificate. I will say, our approach is primarily, though, that we are relying on the EIC as the daily boots on the ground. And that's the system. They should be the ones who are ensuring, first and foremost, that the T's and C's in the site certificate are being met. And as long as that system is working, then we're satisfied. So when we're doing our monthly inspections, we're really trying to determine, is that system functioning? Do we see evidence that it's functioning? Do we see any evidence that it's not functioning? I promise you, I will come back to that point later. So thank you, Nancy, again. For weekly reporting, this is just, again, a summary of what is included there. These reports are typically 10 to 20 pages long. They will include pictures, in particular, if there are any issues, compliance issues that are noted in the reports. So they cover everything. And that last point talks about problem area reports. And again, we'll come back to that. So let's talk about site inspections. And Nancy, you can go to the next one. So our scope of work in our contract with the Oregon Department of Energy includes a monthly on-site inspection. And they're typically one day. I just completed one, which again, I'll talk about a little bit more, and that was a 2-day. But typical would be one day, start with a desk audit at a central location, and we'll look at what we can during a desk audit. It might be their SWIP inspection records, are they keeping up with that? Training records, and make sure that the people who are out on the right of way have received the training that they are supposed to by the site certificate conditions. And then we'll go out in the field and we'll look at, in a general inspection, we're going to look at flagging. Do they have the right of way properly marked, staked, and are they adhering to it? I know one of the big things when I look at this project and other projects where I've been out in the field, I want to make sure they're staying within the limits of disturbance, because that's a big part for any of these energy projects that, that's where things have been surveyed. It's what they've agreed to, that where the ground disturbance will be, they should not be doing ground disturbance outside of those limits. How are they addressing and controlling noxious weeds? How are their erosion and sediment controls in the field? Are they adhering to the fire prevention provisions in their plans? Hazardous materials handling, waste handling, all those things we're looking at. So that would be, if we take a general inspection approach, we also may choose to do a deep dive on a particular condition or a particular plan. And we've done both of these types of inspections to date already. So our company has a subcontract with a firm called Anderson Perry. And we did that because first of all, they're a very good firm. And they're pretty well known out in Central and Eastern Oregon, and they have an office in La Grande. And that's important because we don't have a presence out there. And we did look into that. Could we hire people? This is a better solution for us to use for this project. And so they're out in the area where the line is being built. So they're conducting most of the site inspections on our behalf and on behalf of Odo. And then, we provide technical guidance and support. We know the project better. And so, we're not just sending them out there blindly. I'm having conversations, I'm preparing checklists, and helping them as a technical resource to make sure that they're looking at the right things.
So, it's hard for me to call you Mr. Adams, but Mr. Adams, can I just ask a quick question? I understand that there probably has to be an appointment for a desk audit, but for field inspections, are they announced? Like, do they know where the inspection is happening physically on the ground?
Yeah. Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. It's a great question. So to date, the answer is yes. That's not required. We could show up unannounced. You know, and I suppose in theory, even without an escort, although I certainly, it would have to be, there'd have to be a really good reason to do that, I would think. My approach to these is generally, I will let people know what I'm doing and where I intend to look. And it's intentional because if they know what we're going to look at, I've been on the other side of this actually more than I've been on this side. I was a person in business doing things for most of my life. And I know how you respond. You know that an inspector is coming and they're going to look at things. What do? You go out there and make sure things are in order. And that's what we want. We want them to do it the right way themselves, not because someone is looking over their shoulder today on the day of the audit. With that said, I do like to hold some cards close to the vest and not necessarily say exactly where I'm going to go until I show up. And that's the surprise element, if you will. But you know, that's my approach, and I feel not just on this project, and on other projects, and I feel like it's worked pretty well.
So in just the maps you showed us where there are a couple of projects in a certain county on a certain stretch, might you say, I'm going to visit that area, but maybe not specific to the specific stretch?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank
Vice
you.
Chair Condon, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Imes.
Yes, Mr. Adams, you had said that you do monthly field inspections, and those are once a month, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so with multiple sites within 3 different counties at this time, does that mean that you're only inspecting one of those particular areas once a month, or are all of those areas being inspected once a month?
Thank you, Councilor Imes. We are going to inspect what we can in a day, I'll say. And I say we, and that would apply whether I'm going out there or somebody from Anderson Perry on our behalf. So if we could go to the next slide, Nancy, and this will maybe help answer your question.
Okay, great. And then
So
I do
this is
have
what
one
we-
other question when you're done. Thank you.
Yep. No problem. So what we've done to date, we've now, this says, at the time that I put the slide deck together, we had completed 3 inspections and had a 4th plan. We've now completed 4th. And the first 3, as it says, were general inspections in Malheur County in July and August. And then the one in September, we said, let's do a deep dive on the agricultural mitigation plan. So most of that time was actually spent with the agricultural liaisons for Idaho Power, Eocene, and their construction contractor. So it was several hours of a desk audit, basically going through the elements of the agricultural mitigation plan, and then they went out in the field. This 4th inspection that we just completed this week, by far, we went in the most places in the field, and in part because it was longer, it was 2 days. So we went through about a 5-mile stretch of the right-of-way in Malheur County, several miles in Baker County, and then several miles in Morrill County. And it takes time, you know, to do this. When you go out in these areas and you see a couple of pictures here, like that's a really good road that is shown on the right. Not all the roads look like that. You know, you're driving 10 miles an hour on some of these roads. So you can only cover so much ground. And then before I'll see what your other question is, I'll just say this is what our contract with the Oregon Department of Energy is currently for. Could we do other things? Yes, but that's the scope of work that we have in our contract at this point, is to do these monthly inspections.
Thank
Counselor Imes,
you.
did you, yeah, and did you have another question?
Yes, so you have weekly meetings, it sounds like, and, do you guys have, since there's so many agencies involved with the compliance, yourself and Idaho Powers, compliance team, and then also Anderson and Perry, are you guys meeting collectively during those meetings at the
Um,
same table?
thank you again, Counselor Imes. So we meet, I'd say, huh, it's a very high level of coordination between my company, Oregon Department of Energy, Anderson Perry, Eocene, Idaho Power, their subcontractors. We don't speak as often with our federal counterparts. I do speak with them. I've had Teams calls with them, but we don't have anything regularly established. And it's actually something that I should probably do just to make sure we're staying on the same page with them. So appreciate you bringing that up. And, I can take that as an action item basically to get that set up where I'm talking to them at least monthly.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that with so many boots on the ground, it might be beneficial to have a meeting scheduled for everyone at the table. Just to say, like you said, to be on the same page. Thank you.
Yes, agreed. It's a good suggestion.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Counselor Devlin?
Chair, I just had a comment. I appreciate the presentation. I don't have any questions. It does seem to me, I know that there are proponents and opponents of this transmission line. It seems to me like one of the most complex projects of this type that I've seen in the state. And I kind of liked your typo, the 26 and 27, because it gave me visions of transcontinental railroad. I was wondering how in a year could they do all of this?
Thank you, Counselor Devlin. Makes me think that do they need a golden spike or the equivalent, right? So. Okay, so we'll move on. Let's talk about compliance issues, and some of this will be what we've seen, and some of it will be more just in general how they get handled. So as I mentioned earlier, in the weekly report that we get from Eocene, they have a section for problem area reports. Not all of those are going to be non-compliances with site certificate conditions, right? There's something that an environmental inspector noted in the field they thought needed to be addressed, and it gets addressed and it's noted. So there's some transparency there, which I like, and it helps give us some eyes on what's happening without physically being there. And again, that's their role and what we want them to do. With that said, there are things that have been noted that either are or could be non-compliances with site certificate conditions. So the first one I have here, they did have an encroachment into a cultural resource buffer, and it was noted then as a non-compliance by the CIC and therefore by the BLM. I wrote this slide now. As of yesterday, I did get the report that they submitted to BLM with their corrective actions to close that out. And I made a note here because I do think it's important. This is actually in the statute that the council shall avoid duplication of effort with site inspections and compliance reviews by other state and federal agencies and local governments that have issued permits or licenses. So, we should be aware, but we're aware of this statute and are trying to adhere to it, that we're trying not to be duplicative in our efforts, because it's wasteful. We shouldn't do that. So But with that said, we'll still note that. And before I would close that out in our records, I would at least want to see that the proper corrective actions were taken. And I'll talk about that a little bit more, what our expectations are with noncompliances here in a minute. They've also reported 3 other occurrences of soil being moved outside of basically what I'd call the LOD, the limits of disturbance. So I'm waiting for additional information to determine for sure if any of those or all of those are actually non-compliances. One of them I know is, I'm going to show you pictures of it because I saw it the other day when I was out on the right of way. So now I'd like to just show you a few pictures and give you a little better feel for what's happening. So this is just, to show you some of what's going on. And the picture on the right are the footings for one of the tower structures. And then of course on the left is one of the towers that's being assembled. That's the base that they actually have up. And then you see the other pieces that are assembled, but they haven't been put on top yet. It's basically waiting for a crane to come over so that they can set those and finish the construction. So, and it gives you a little bit of a feel for, just how this actually looks, right, on site. One of the things that I saw when I was in the field here the last couple of days, if we can move to the next slide, Nancy. So noxious weed control is an important issue on these type of projects, and there are requirements. Dropped. It's all right. Give it a minute.
Just a comment, and this might, this might be showing my age, but I would describe those as a Rector set.
Yeah.
As opposed to Legos.
Yeah. I like that.
Age.
I think you're right. That's more accurate.
Counselor Byer has a question.
So this is an overall general question. There are monitoring reports, there are compliance reports. If I or any member of the public wanted to see those, would I see those? Is it a public information request, or how would I sort of see what's going on with the project?
Thank you, Counselor Byer, for the question. I see no reason why they would be exempt from disclosure under Oregon's public records laws. I think if somebody made a public records request, they certainly would be entitled to look at any or all of that information. They're not currently, so they're not posted to the department's website, for example, at this point in time. What we use between ourselves, the Oregon Department of Energy, and Anderson Perry is we have a SharePoint site, and so all of these things get posted there. So the department has access to all of that at any time, basically, and our subcontractor has access to them because they need them.
And appreciating that there is a level of detail in these reports that might be overwhelming to someone like me, but it's good to know that there is a record, and if I were really compelled, I could do a public information request.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Just while we're waiting, a question. So BLM has their own contractor, and given the statute that you included, the language from the statute about duplicative effort, if funding or lack of funding would affect BLM and their inspection work. It's no longer duplicative. Would that get managed?
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. It's really interesting. And I just spoke to one of he's actually the project manager for Eocene about this very thing the other day. And what he told me is that the lead person for the Bureau of Land Management on this project, that their position is funded. It must be, I'm not sure that I understand the nuances, if it's like, because of the way it's classified, that it's a critical position, but that person is working and that they're not in any danger of suddenly not having their job or not, being laid off or something. Similarly, power engineers, and they have a contract with BLM, they are not impacted by this either, is my understanding. Now, if it persisted for a really long time, could things change? I suppose anything's possible, but at least at this point in time, there has been no impact to the oversight. And when we get back into this, which it looks like Nancy just about has us there, then you'll see where we got a recent example where they were involved and identifying and taking action on a non-compliance that occurred. So I have no reason to doubt that. I think they're still out there in force and have not been impacted.
Okay, and since there's a little bit more time, did you want to make a comment about that from the room? Yeah. Just so we capture it.
Sure. For the record, Joe Stipp with Idaho Power. So we actually have a cost reimbursement agreement with the BLM to cover all costs for their staff.
Okay.
So they're independently funded. That allows them to stay at work. Similar situation with power engineers. We're funding that directly. So they're not actually congressionally appointed funds. It's coming out of Idaho Power's paying for that funding.
Okay, thank you for that additional comment. All right, technical issues. If you'll, maybe we'll just take a 5-minute break to let Nancy pull up the technical or deal with the technical issues. Thank you. So we'll continue. Mr. Adams? Feel free to continue.
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. So Nancy, if we could go to the next slide, thank you. That's it, the weed wash. So one of the things I looked at in a couple of locations were weed wash stations. Noxious weed control is one of the conditions under the site certificate, one of the requirements. There's a pretty lengthy plan that was developed and then included as part of the site certificate. And it basically requires that if you have vehicles that are moving in and out of areas that have noxious weed infestations, that the vehicles be washed before they exit, right? So we're preventing the spread of noxious weed seeds. So there's a mix of good and bad here. The picture on the right shows one of these stations and the basic setup. So, and this is as good as anything I've ever seen, honestly, on any project site, the way that they have these set up. So they put silt fence on either side to make this lane. They put large rock underneath basically to trap what gets washed off. Now, and normally what's used for these weed washes is water. So basically the typical setup you'll see is a big water container, a couple 100 gallons maybe, that's on a trailer, portable trailer that they can move around. It has a pressure washer on it, and so then the person goes around the vehicle and sprays it off. this system uses compressed air. So in the left-hand picture, that tan box has a compressor in it, and it's a big compressor. It's substantial. I should have asked how many horsepower those are, but they are larger than a typical household compressor, I'll just say. But I asked to see one in use and I was left unimpressed. And I think the main problem is just, it's a little hard to see in the picture, but on the right, you see the hose and there's a wand, but that wand didn't have like a proper spray nozzle. It just was like a bent tube at the end. And so, once the person starts spraying, the pressure, and there's a pressure gauge on the compressor, of course, on the tank, and you can see the pressure just within a few seconds just drop off almost to nothing. So, good concept not being implemented well yet. They were being used. They have logs on them, and the logs indicated that they were being used extensively, but at a minimum, they need proper wands for those so that you can really use it to spray off a whole vehicle and not lose pressure after just 5 or 10 seconds. And I'm not 100% sold on the air versus water. It's especially in that part of the country, what you can do to conserve water is good, but and it still has to work. So I think the jury is still out on those, and that will be in our inspection report, asking for some improvements on those and demonstrate that they are able to do the job that they're supposed to be doing.
Mr. Adams, a quick question. So going back to the slide for the compliance issues, so this wasn't noted in the compliance issue. So how is that?
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. Yeah, and I put this deck together, and then I went and did this inspection, and then I quickly tried to update these slides yesterday after I got back, and I put some of these pictures in. I did not update that previous slide, but it is an issue that we noted in the inspection report. And I'll consult with the Department of Energy on how we classify that. If it's actually recorded as a non-compliance, my inclination is yes, that they've not demonstrated compliance to that portion of their noxious weed plan is the way that I would view it. And I would want some then more formal, as opposed to an observation or a recommendation, which we also include those things in reports, but it's lower level, right?
So at this point, it is an issue, but it is not a non-compliance issue. It's a question.
That's right. We have not notified them of that. And I typically would not do that without consulting first with the Department of Energy. And because we're acting on their behalf. And so typically when we do things, it's either the reports are being issued by the Department of Energy, or we're saying on behalf of Odo that we're doing this, because we don't have the authority. Odo does, and the council does.
Okay, thank you.
So if we move to the next slide, this to me is the biggest issue so far that we've seen in the 3 months of construction. And this was initially flagged by EOCene during their monitoring and included in one of their weekly monitoring reports. So there's an area in Baker County where the transmission line will run, and they need access roads to be built in order to be able to build the line. And it's a challenging area. The pictures don't really do it justice. These are steep, these are mountains. And so when they went to put this access road through, they ended up with soil going outside the limits of disturbance. And the left-hand picture is kind of looking down the road. And then the picture on the right is from a little different angle, and wish I had a pointer. It's some old technology here, but you know, that part on the left is what you're seeing in the other picture, just from a different angle. But then you kind of go around the corner, you can really see how dirt went quite a ways down the hill, right? And there wasn't initially, but there's now a silt fence. What's kind of that shiny ribbon in the right picture is silt fence that's since been put up. But so Eocene is, again, that's Idaho Power's environmental contractor. They flagged this. It caught the attention then of the CIC power engineers, who looked at it and said, this is a big problem, got BLM involved, and they said, shut it down. So that sign actually that's in the left-hand picture, that sign says, no work. You can't do anything here. So it's a non-compliance from BLM then to Idaho Power. And so they have to basically come up with a different plan for how they're going to build that road so that they're not going to continue to have spoils going down the side of the hill before they can continue construction, and then BLM will have to sign off on that. So this is another one where, to me, there's some good and bad. I mean, it's a big, long, complicated project. It's unrealistic to think that there won't be any issues ever on a project like this. So they had an issue. The issue was identified, work was stopped. They're coming up with a better plan. So that's the good part. The part about this that bothers me is that, so this happened on federal land, and therefore the CIC got involved and brought BLM in, and they stopped work. So what if this was on private land? That's my concern here, is would the same thing have happened? And we could speculate, but I will say it's causing us to rethink how we would approach compliance in some of these areas. At a minimum, I'll look at, well, where are there potentially steep cuts like this on private land? And do we need to have more of a presence there when that happens? And we'll have those discussions with Odo. You know, we're relying on the environmental inspection contractor to a great extent here, but that requires that they basically would have the stop work authority and would exercise it when needed, which doesn't appear to be what happened in this case. They flagged it, but they didn't actually stop the work.
Counselor Byer?
So does Odo have stop work authority when there's a violation of site certificate conditions? We haven't been here before.
Yeah. Thank you, Counselor Byer. Yeah, the short answer is yes, absolutely. You can require them to stop work, and I'm sure they would. I have no reason to believe that they would fight that. They're going to listen to Odo's authority.
Thank you.
Oh, Counselor Devlin.
This particular site, was this intended to be, or is intended to be, a permanent road or a temporary road?
Thank you, Counselor Devlin. I would actually have to look to verify. I believe that is permanent. But I don't know that with 100% certainty without looking at the project map to check that that's a permanent or temporary road.
I know that at times, just to be able to do the job, you're going to have roads that are on topography that's like this. I do not know what the conditions are in this area of Oregon in terms of, obviously, there's not a lot of precipitation, but if this was, you know, like in some of the areas in Western Oregon, I'd be worried about slides, not spilling, but actual slides. I just don't know. Do they have to evaluate these areas for slides before they build a road?
Absolutely. Your council standards require that, and there were very intense and I'm sure expensive geotechnical investigations and reports that were done. And it's probably more of question for the developer or certificate holder if you really wanted to get deeper into that. But I know for sure myself that that's done. I actually, as we get, I think in one or two more slides here, I'm going to show you what precipitation is for this general area because it's a relevant question. But yeah, the landslide risk is one of the risks also that I know was assessed and was discussed even before the pre-construction, the conditions for pre-construction that deal with that would be signed off, that they had done enough work and had addressed it.
So just a comment, I'm not sure if this is appropriate, but you don't have eyes in the back of your head, and Mr. Stipple was nodding his head that this is a permanent road.
Oh, okay.
I think that is correct.
Thank you.
And then a question, just with respect to if this were to happen on private land. So obviously we have our conditions. Does the landowner, what would be the landowner's route to, they have a contract with the developer. We obviously have conditions. So how does that work together?
Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. They could contact us. They could contact Idaho Power and or EOSIN and voice a concern. They could contact the Oregon Department of Energy. They could reach out to me directly. So there are multiple paths. And even if you said that the landowner is okay with it, it wouldn't be okay with us because this is, you're getting into, this is the an issue with their erosion and sediment control plan more than anything else. But I mean, going outside again of their limits of disturbance just in general is not an issue. But with this, that's, you know, if I forget the limits of disturbances are set in the site certificate, why would this concern me? Because I know downslope there are streams and water courses, and that's where this is eventually going to go. And that's what we're trying to prevent.
So there is no obligation on the landowner to report. I mean, we don't certainly have a condition for that. And so it does fall on us to be very diligent on private property.
Yes, there has to be a system in place to ensure that this doesn't happen. And if something does, like I say, inadvertently something happens, that at least then the proper reaction happens afterwards to say, we need to stop and reassess. It needs to be reported. And part of that happened. It was reported. It's, but the, you know, and I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I'm just trying to be very transparent and bring some transparency to this for you, that you know what's going on. And that's the concern that I have is, will EOSIN exercise their stop work when it's required? And I know that they have at times, but it can be difficult for people. Sometimes people don't want to go that far with things. They don't want to actually stop the construction crews from doing their job, but that's what was needed here.
Thank you. And I think that's what this council wants to hear from you, is your frank comments, being the person on the ground and eyes and ears. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Vice Chair.
Okay, so move on along. I think these are the last pictures that I have. And these are really examples of what I thought were some good things. And I want to say, I saw a lot of good. I mean, you're hearing the couple of things that I saw that I wasn't totally happy with. I saw many miles of construction with people doing the right thing. So the picture on the left is just showing soil management at a structure pad site. Those are the piles of topsoil. They have BMPs around them. They're segregated. It's the right way to do it. It's good. On the right and that was in Malheur County, by the way. On the right, this was in Morrow County. They haven't done as much work here. So, and I'll try to describe what you're looking at. In the foreground is a structure pad, and then there's a bit of a drop off. There are agricultural fields in the distance and a stream, which you can't really see very well, but it's there. And in between, they put up silt fence. You know, and I asked the person who I was with, who is the Eocene person, the contractor, I said, did they do that because you told them to do that? And he said, no, the construction contractor determined that that was needed and did that themselves. And I said, that's great. That's really what you want. That tells me that the people doing the work understand erosion and sediment control and are doing the right things proactively. So, you know, that'll protect that from that stream that's in the distance from having sediment run off from that pad going there.
Vice Chair Condon.
Yeah, Secretary Cornett.
So I think Councilmember Imes may have a question.
Councilmember Imes,
Yes, thank you.
you have a comment or
Chair.
question?
Yes. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
This is Marcy. I can hear you.
Okay, I don't think they can hear me in the room.
Yeah, no one's answering. Very strange.
Yeah. Hmm. Okay, I will text Todd.
Okay.
Counselor Imes, can you try again?
Yes, can you hear me?
Does anybody
Cindy,
know if
can
she
you hear Marcy?
I can hear you, Marcy.
So I can hear Katie, but apparently you can't hear her.
Okay, Katie, can you try again?
Okay, how about now?
There we go.
Okay, great. So my question is kind of a general question pertaining to the roads, and the example that you provided us in an earlier slide. Are those roads, I mean, obviously there's different jurisdictions going on here. So the example that you gave us, that's that's BLM. Is there any concern for the public accessing this particular area on their, public vehicles?
Thank you, Counselor Imes. So we went through a locked gate. Somebody had to get a key and open that
Okay.
gate to get through to there, and then they locked it behind us. And that's one of the things, you know, again, we'll look for as we're out there. Whether it's a public or a controlled access point like that, or it could be gates on private land where the property owners want the gates to be closed. You know, and I'll say on construction projects like this, that can be a common complaint, actually from landowners, because the guys don't want to get out of their truck every time and open and close gates. I did not see, and we went through a number of gates on Wednesday and Thursday, and it looked to me like people were being very diligent about observing those controls. So for what that's
Yeah.
worth.
Yeah, thank you. I just was curious, obviously on private land, that might not be as much of a concern, but yeah, it's good to hear that there's locked gates.
Yeah, and just to finish, I mean, because it is public land, I mean, the public can access a lot of these areas, that it's a construction zone, and you would not want members of the public driving down those roads right now, is why you got to have a controlled access point. But yeah, people could get into some of those areas, I suppose, if they really wanted to, but not with a vehicle, or not easily.
Well, I
Thank
think
you.
about the season that we're in right now, and that's hunting season. So there's a lot of people
Yeah.
out there scouting for hunting. So
And they are in the area. We actually talked about that with some of the people that they hear gunshots in the distance, or they can actually see in the distance, the hunters. So they are out there in some of the project areas.
Thank you.
All right, we'll keep moving then. I know it's taking a lot of time. We are, I promise, getting near the end. So just briefly, the non-compliance process. Division 29 of the council's rules deal with this, and 290010 in particular describes the process for resolving conditions or circumstances that may violate the T's and C's of the site certificate. And I've kind of, summarized this. I'll say it's, what are the requirements or the obligations that the certificate holder has? First of all, they have to report the issue. They have to complete immediate corrective actions, and then they have to submit a written report within 30 days. And that report has to include root cause, data discovery, and immediate corrective actions, permanent corrective actions. And then they also have to assess any impacts to resources protected by council standards. So I personally think whoever wrote, I don't know how this rule is developed. I think it's pretty good. It mirrors my experience from when I was on the private side of how we would handle, say, safety incidents. For example, this is the type of analysis that you do. And so this is what we would require for instances of noncompliance. This would be the first thing that we would say, okay, this is noncompliance with this condition of the site certificate, and we want to know that you've completed your immediate corrective actions and what they were, and then have that written report within 30 days so we can review it. And then, if there are repeated or serious violations, they can result in further penalties, civil penalties or other remedies that are spelled out in Division 29. Yes.
Yes, Councilor Breyer.
A couple of the examples we've seen have been violations of erosion and sediment control, which I think comes under the DEQ permit. Does DEQ help with enforcement on this, and can they be partners
Yes.
if we need them?
Thank you, Councilor Byer. And I moving fast through some of this, but yes, we would notify them, and they will definitely help. Other agencies will get involved depending on what the issue would be, right?
And this is a follow-up really on my previous question, I guess, regarding the public. Here, we talk about the report of the issue from the site certificate holder, but for a member of the public who believes there is an issue, we had a issue on another project, which was dust, blowing dust that actually neighboring property owners reported. So in that case, it's a report to the department. And then there's a determination whether that is really a compliance issue or not. And then we approach the site certificate holder. Is that the?
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Condon. Yes, in your rules addresses, I think where you're probably going with it is a request for a site inspection. A member of the public has a right to do that. There's an evaluation. Is this required or not? I'm going to say 9 out of 10 or 99 out of 100 times, you're probably going to do the inspection because it's probably the right thing to do. And even if you weren't sure, there's the process to deny the request is almost more onerous than just doing the inspection. So, you're probably going to do it regardless. And that is, I can't remember if that's part of Division 26 but I'm familiar with it and know the reference.
Thank you.
Okay, so this is my last slide is what I'm just calling my watch list. I didn't know what to call it. I wanted to summarize with things that letting you know that, we'll be keeping an eye on. Erosion and sediment control in general is a typical area of concern on FSEC projects. We see where people do things and they put BMPs in place in dry weather, and then, here comes the rain and they don't hold up. So, some of that can be predicted, some of it's more difficult, but we'll be watching. And then I put this chart in just as a point of reference. This is average precipitation in Malheur County. We all know it's been very dry. It just demonstrates we've had dry weather till now, and they don't get a lot of precipitation in Malheur County at any time of year, right? The tallest peak on there is 1.4 inches in a month. So, it's depending on where you live, that's pretty low, but still. All right, that's the thing, hopefully they don't get it all at once, because if you got the 1.4 inches all in one storm, then, that'll challenge some of those BMPs out there, and it can happen. So we talked about the access roads with steep cuts on private land. I will be following up and looking into that more, and discussing that with Odo, what our approach is to that. I mentioned the weed wash stations needing improvement, and we'll work on that. And then something we haven't talked about at all, I think, the biological and cultural monitors for the project, from what I've seen, are doing a really good job. But they bumped into an issue that I don't think they really expected, and that was burrowing owls, where they're more numerous in the project area than what they expected. One of the multi-use areas, they weren't able to develop that fully because there were burrowing owls there. Now they do migrate in and out, but they're still, I say they, so it's the certificate holder is working with ODFW on how to resolve that, I'll say. And yeah, I think that's it.
Councillor Byer.
It's not related to compliance, but construction looking forward during the winter months. I'm assuming there are some places you can work, some places you can't, and just curious as to what that looks like in the winter months in Eastern Oregon.
Thank you, Councilor Byer. I have been told that they will work through the winter. That they'll have to maybe adjust, obviously, depending on how wet it is, and there'll be areas where maybe they can't get into it certain times. But their intention is to basically work year round until the project is complete.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments in the room or online? Okay, just a final, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you, Mr. Adams. I really, really appreciate your presentation and how, frank you are, and I just really appreciate it. This is like you've been saying over and over, a very complex project, and there's many things going on at once. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Councillor Grail, any comment or question? I'll take that as a no. No? Is she on? Councillor Grail, can you hear me, or do you have a question or comment? Okay, Councillor Byer.
Again, thank you, and just know we'll be getting these updates probably quarterly or so. And just so the public knows, this is a hugely important project for the state and for the council. And we take the compliance piece really seriously, and appreciate the effort of Odo and contractors and subcontractors the developer and the agency partners because it's a big deal. So thank you all.
Secretary Cornett.
Yeah, for the record, Todd Cornett. I'll sort of pose your statement as a question. How frequently do you want these updates? Obviously, it's a big project. We're likely to do this more often into the future with other projects as well. Maybe not to the the extent that we're doing this one, just because it's a different type of project. But I think having that value of seeing what's happening on the ground, having some frequency of updates, quarterly might be good, might be too much, depends probably on what's going on actually. But I don't know, just asking council, what's your preference?
Just I don't mean to speak for the whole council, but I would say at least quarterly. You know, if compliance issues cropped up more and more, I think I'd feel differently. But given the comprehensive nature of this report, thank you very much. Quarterly, at least quarterly for me.
And
Councilor Byer.
You just turned it off.
And then if there are any major issues, and I would characterize this erosion issue as being kind of major, we'd like to know about those as well and just know that it's being responded to, because I think the public wants to know about that, and we certainly do, and it will help us as we develop conditions for future projects. So thank you.
And certainly anything noteworthy, will be updated during the secretary report. This is more of the broader, kind of general update, which I think was very, very helpful. So thank you, Wally, on that.
All the pieces.
Yeah, very, very good. Well, if there are no more questions, we'll move on to our next item, which is the Sunset Solar Project request for Amendment 1, and it's the proposed order review and possible final decision. And Kathleen Sloan, Senior Siting Analyst, is here to talk to us.
Okay. Thank you, Vice Chair Condon. For the record, my name is Kathleen Sloan. I'm a Senior Siting Analyst with the Department of Energy. And as the Vice Chair mentioned, I'm here to talk about the Sunset Solar Project request for Amendment 1 and Council's review of the proposed order. I'll talk about this more in a minute, but this is a Type B review under the old amendment rules, or the current soon to be former amendment rules, presumably. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an overview very quickly of the approved facility. I'm going to give the department's evaluation of the request for Amendment 1. Under the Type B process, we issue the draft proposed order and we open it up for written public comment, but there is no public hearing. And then we, based upon those comments and our own internal review, we make edits to that draft proposed order, some changes, and issued the proposed order. And that's kind of our jumping off point for today. And I'll get more into it as I get through the slides. And so we're going to talk about all of the things that happen in that process, and then council will have opportunity to deliberate and possibly make a decision today to adopt the proposed order as a final order. So just really briefly, I'm going to give you a little bit on the history of both the Sunset project and the request for amendment, and also, the larger picture. So this slide is, I think, indicative of the original versus what the request for amendment was. So the big black outline is the approved site boundary. The reason it's so big is it's over 10,000 acres, is because it also encompasses Bake Oven and Daybreak. Okay, and I'll get to that in a minute, but one of the requests in the request for Amendment 1 is to modify that site boundary to reflect what's in the orange lines and the crosshatch, which is the actual Sunset facility, and the 34 0.5 kV collector lines that intertie into the transmission line that's already built. So as approved, the Sunset Solar project is a subset of the original Bake Oven project. And I have it on another slide. I probably should have reversed these, but it's an approved but not yet constructed for 103 megawatts of solar related and supporting facilities that are shared between Bake Oven and Daybreak and Sunset, many of which are already constructed and on those two projects. And the one difference is that there is an approved 100 megawatts of potential battery storage that's within the Sunset Solar Site certificate, also to be shared between the three facilities. So this facility is located off of Bake Oven Road, about 8 miles from here. And it is adjacent to the already constructed but not commercially operational Bake Oven and Daybreak. Sunset Solar project is owned by the parent company, Avangrid Power, which owns all three. Next slide. So again, it's just the actual Sunset site certificate as approved is for these things. The solar array, all of the related and supporting facilities, additional perimeter fence, additional access road within that perimeter fence. And again, that 34.5 kV collection line that will run everything to the substation where it gets stepped up to the 230 kV and the 100 megawatts battery storage. Next slide. So I should have started with this slide. This is kind of a visual and a description of the history of the Sunset Site certificate. So in 2020, council approved the Bake Oven Solar project, which is this larger facility. And it was originally approved for 303 megawatts. In 2021, that site certificate was split into 3 sites, in part because of the power purchase agreements, the power off-taker agreements. And so for Sunset, it became this 103 megawatt facility with related and supporting. And so that is the site certificate that's under review right now. Next slide. So there were 2 primary requests within the RFA1 from the certificate holder. Primarily, they want to extend the construction start and end dates. They do not have a power purchase agreement yet. They're working on it. They were not able to meet their April 2025 start construction deadline. So they had to come in for an amendment, and they did that. And they requested to extend another 3 years. So bump it out to start by April of 2028. In the process, they also want to reduce the site boundary for Sunset. So instead of that large 10,000 acres, they want to actually reduce it to the footprint of, the actual facility. And there's a little reduction of about 326 acres, I think, that they're cutting out of the site boundary. And the reason for that is to reflect the actual lease with the landowner. So they ended up not citing it on that part of the parcel. And so if you go back to that map, you can see this little part that's cut out. They also, as a process of that, we also have to review all standards and all of the draft plans. And there were some sites and certificate condition recommendations that we made based upon that review that I'll get into. So as part of our visual process, I'm going to pull up something because I wanted to, okay. So there's just a couple of things. So this slide is basically to reflect the type B review. So the applicant submitted the preliminary request for amendment and what we call amendment determination request for a type B review. So we reviewed the the preliminary RFA and also the ADR. And based upon our review and agency coordination and the types of proposed changes, the changes in factor law, we put that through our ADR review and we did determine that it was eligible for a type B. Not a lot has changed. They're not making big changes in the proposal, and it's a pretty straightforward deadline extension. We also didn't have a lot of agency comments on the PRFA, but we got a lot of input from them, but there wasn't anything big in there when we were doing our review. So we issued the type B determination, posted that to our website, and continued to work with the applicant to get them to completeness. And we determined that they were complete at the end of August of this year. They submitted a complete request for amendment on September 5th. So on September 9th, we issued the draft proposed order. We issued a public notice. We posted it on our website. We published it in, not published it, we issued the public notice and we opened it up for written public comment because there is no public hearing, there is no oral testimony. So we had a 31-day comment period. We received no public comments during that time frame, and that public comment period closed on October 10th. So we gave them 31 days. We did get comments. We got 2 reviewing agency comments from Department of State Lands and also ODFW, Fish and Wildlife. And we also got comments from the applicant. And I'm going to dive into those later, but I'm going to skim through some stuff in the how we first framed it in the draft proposed order and how we amended it or amended it in the changes in the proposed order. And so on October 14th, we issued the proposed order, and now we're here. So today is the day for council to review the proposed order. You can ask me questions at any time. I'm going to launch into a overview of the proposed order and the draft proposed order and the changes between, and then land on our recommendations and kind of turn it over to council for deliberation. But if any of you have any questions while I'm going through this, please feel free to stop me and you can ask questions about anything. Next slide. So the 2 main things to focus on for council's scope of review is that for an amendment that requests a deadline extension, it's kind of 2 things that we absolutely have to determine. And that is that the facility with the proposed changes still continues to comply with the laws or council standards applicable to the original site certificate. And that for all requests for amendment, we have to reevaluate the amount of bond, letter of credit for the facility to make sure it's adequate. Next slide. So now I'm launching into the proposed order, draft proposed order. So the department issues the draft proposed order. That's our first cut. We get comments, we go in and make revisions. We've issued a proposed order. So part of my presentation is going to start out from the draft proposed order, and then the last few slides are going to drill into where we made changes. So for these standards listed on this slide, based upon, because we evaluate all standards under a deadline extension request, we did not conclude that there were any significant changes in factor law that would require either new or amended conditions or would change council's previous findings. And these are those standards. So I'm not going to drill into any of these, but if you have questions, you can certainly ask about them. So I don't want to exclude it from conversation, but it's not going to be a focus in my presentation. Next slide. So I'm just going to rattle through the standards. I have page references and some highlights on our recommended changes. So in order to have a deadline extension, it actually requires an amended general standards condition 1, because that's what sets the deadline for construction. And so in the draft proposed order, we do recommend changes to this condition to to approve that 3-year deadline. And in that request, and I'll get to this at the end or later on, but I have a little caveat on there that there was a material change. In that request, they had asked that we just bump the completion deadline to 3 years after commencing construction. Based upon a closer review of the OARs, we actually made a change to that because it requires us to put a year in there, a date. And so that's the material change I'll talk about later. So the GS1 is really just to approve that deadline extension request and bump those dates out. Next slide. So this is the condition as it was originally proposed and then modified. So this is the one slide where I'm going to show you upfront what we did in the proposed order change because it's important. So the black strikeout is what we had originally put in the draft proposed order. And you can see we said that it would commence or it would complete without a specific deadline. We had to go back in and change that. And that's where the red line is. So we have modified from the draft proposed order to the proposed order this condition to comply with the requirements of the OARs and populate it with that required end date. And that's the change. But it's considered a material change. And so I just wanted to highlight that. Next slide. So then I'm going to go into organizational expertise. And we talked a little bit about this last night. It's something that the department is focusing on, and that is to include recommended conditions that require the certificate holder to identify a qualified compliance person. That person's identity and qualifications have to be provided to the department, and that it applies not just during construction, but also during operations of the facility. And so those are the new recommended conditions that we are recommending council adopt or impose in the draft proposed order. And then moving on to retirement and financial assurance, the last review was based upon the site certificate split was the last time we looked at these numbers. And so we updated those to adjust the amount to Q3 2025 dollars. And so it increased it to that amount. So we've changed that condition. Yes.
Secretary Cornett?
Yeah, for the record, Todd Cornett. This is in somewhat a response to one of the comments that was made last night, and just make sure that everybody's kind of tracking. So you can see the dollar amounts and they're tied to a specific quarter. But, once a facility goes into construction, those get updated every year. So we require those bonds or letters of credit to be adjusted for inflation every year. So we have a process by which we, get the gross domestic product, we evaluate that, we determine basically what's inflation for that year, then they have to submit an updated version. So I think the question last night was related to, well, you said it now, and in 30 or 40 years, it's going to be, a fraction of what the real value is. In a draft proposed order comment, it's not really a back and forth. So I kind of wanted to respond to that. But I think in the context of this, I think it is good to make sure that everybody's tracking. These will be adjusted every year through the life of the facility to make sure that the real dollar amount, or the inflationary dollar amount, gets adjusted appropriately. So.
Thank you. That's a
Thank you for that.
And that's part of their annual reporting requirements too. So they do it every year. Okay. So the next one that I'm going to focus on is the fish and wildlife habitat. Yes.
Ms. Sloan, before you move on, just back to the expertise, the
organizational expertise.
organizational
Okay.
expertise. So, and I think I'm in the right. Yeah. So I am curious about the change of removing may.
Of what?
Removing may and the certificate holders shall as soon as possible in the staff report. You haven't pulled it up here, but there's been a removal, unless I'm reading it incorrectly. Report incidents or circumstances that may violate the terms. Is removed.
We're going to get into that.
Oh,
Those
good.
are the changes that I'll talk about between the
sorry, I
draft
thought you were
proposed
moving
order and the
on.
proposed order.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you.
And if somehow it isn't there, we'll come back to it when we talk about
Okay,
the
all
proposed
right.
order.
Thank you.
So for Fish and Wildlife, it's already gone through review. The the certificate holder has entered into third-party mitigation agreements for both Daybreak and Sunset, and have the same plan and draft plan in place to do the same thing for Sunset. And that is through Deschutes Land Trust. And so they're pretty far along on their habitat mitigation because of the way this site certificate evolved. So they had done a lot of the review and drafted the plans based upon the initial, when it was all one facility. And then as they have constructed Bake Oven and Daybreak, they have implemented that HMP and on the HMA, and they have the same plans to do the same for this one. They will have to true it up before construction, but they're in the process of doing now so that they can have their HMA and HMP finalized prior to construction. But they're not making any proposed changes to that. It's really just truing up the level of impact and where the suitable mitigation is within Deschutes Land Trust. So the one change that fell under Fish and Wildlife Habitat that we did have comments from ODFW on was the desire of the, it says applicant, but it's certificate holder, for the certificate holder to introduce sheep grazing as a form of noxious weed control. They have done this with council's approval as of last year for Bake Oven and Daybreak. It was the first time this has kind of come up. They have put those protocols under the noxious weed control plan, and they have requested the potential to do it. They haven't committed to doing it. They're not 100% that they're going to do it, but they wanted to amend the draft noxious weed control plan to include it as a possibility. And ODFW has concerns and comments about that. I think people are aware of, but the primary concern is that domestic sheep can pass on a respiratory disease to the native bighorn sheep that could potentially decimate them. And so they have strong concerns. And a lot of their concerns are scaled based upon the proximity to the known herds. So they are working, ODFW, on best management practices that they would like to see if sheep grazing is going to be utilized. And it is something that the certificate holder has requested in this amendment request to add to the noxious weed plan. So we have input from ODFW on that, on BMPs. And we have also incorporated some of that into condition language. So next slide. Public services, we talked a little bit about this last night, but it was in context of this project that we received Wasco County comments from the county sheriff on their experiences with the construction period for Bake Oven and Daybreak. And they have outlined a specific set of concerns. Those concerns are included in the reviewing agency comments that you got. Primarily to public safety, traffic safety. And in response to that, we asked the certificate holder to coordinate with the county sheriff office to help resolve and identify how those issues could be addressed. And to the certificate holder's credit, they did do that. They engaged with the Lane County Sheriff, and there's some email back and forth on how they came up with that list of like what they would agree to and the protocols that the sheriff agreed to. Those are in the reviewing agency comments. And we incorporated that into our amended public services condition 4 to actually provide more specificity on what the certificate holder is obligated to do. And part of it is to coordinate with the county before construction, with the sheriff, and coordinate with the sheriff on a monthly basis and on a 6-month basis, report to the department. So there are they have to demonstrate that there's an ongoing dialogue, and we will also make sure that the sheriff office knows that they can reach out to us if there's any issues that they have concerns about.
Just a quick question. I think you said Lane County.
I did.
And
It's
okay.
not, it's Wasco County. I live in Lane County, so it's my default.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. The county sheriff's name is Lane McGill. Okay, so I might have started to say his name and then forgot to say it, but
Good reason.
thank you. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this was a standard that we did evaluate under council's more recently adopted wildfire prevention and risk mitigation standard. This facility, the amendment, were approved prior to the wildfire standard being adopted. So part of the RFA is that the certificate holder had to do that level of evaluation in the request for an amendment and provide that information to us so that we could evaluate it under this new standard. And they have prepared, in coordination with the department, the draft wildfire mitigation plans that are required for both construction and operations. They are drafts, so they will need to be finalized. And because council has not previously evaluated this facility under this standard, we imposed, or we're recommending you impose, those new conditions to require both for construction and operations that they finalize and implement and adhere to those wildfire mitigation plans. Yes.
Councillor Byer.
I know several months ago, probably longer than that, we had a presentation on the template wildfire mitigation plan. Did they use that
Yes,
at all?
they did.
What?
They did.
Thank you.
They have some tweaks to it based upon the fact that they have other plans. So they're trying to be consistent with their corporate company plans, but they did provide. Next slide. Okay, removal of fill. So we did get comments from DSL. I think the things to know about this regulation is that when the site certificate was split and when the original site certificate for Bake Oven was approved in 2020, when the site certificate was split in 2021, there was a current wetlands delineation for the whole thing, the whole 10,000 acres, and a concurrence from the Department of State Lands. That concurrence and that delineation have expired. And that was a comment that DSL provided to us. And so in the draft proposed order, we recommended that they needed to redo that. We have some changes to that recommended condition based on department evaluation and certificate holder comments. And that's when I'm going to pivot to the changes between the draft proposed order. But in the draft proposed order, we do add a removal fill condition 1 because now some demonstration that a removal fill permit is not still no longer needed is still required, and the old one is expired. So in the next, I believe this is where I'm going to pivot from how we set it up in the DPO and where we didn't make a lot of changes in the proposed order, but there are a few, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So before that, just public comments. So we did not get any public comments during the public comment period. we did get the 2 comment letters from Department of State Lands and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife on the draft proposed order. And based upon those comments and the comments we received from the certificate holder, we added this table A1 in the proposed order, and we sent the supplemental report, which just kind of summarizes this, and we can go over it in more detail in the next slides. And so based upon that evaluation, we did make some minor revisions in the proposed order and to some select relevant recommended site certificate condition. And that's what I'm going to cover next. So we're going to start with the certificate holders' comments first, because they were probably the more substantive comments that we received. They did make some requests and comments on requested language changes under organizational expertise. We did evaluate those. They provided them in that table A1. You'll see them in red line. We did evaluate them, and based upon our evaluation, we actually do not recommend that council accept those changes, and we recommend that council rejects the request to change the language to that condition. The certificate also asked for changes related to the timing and notification and the terminology of the on-site compliance manager for those new recommended conditions. And those conditions we did recommend you accept because they're for clarification purposes. So one was, they call them an on-site compliance manager rather than whatever we had put in the condition. And then there's a requirement in the draft condition, in the draft proposed order, that they notify us within 72 hours if anything changed with that person. And they asked if we could just change it to that they will promptly notify us. Like, they're required to notify us in 72 hours of a violation or an incident. But for this, we felt like we could give them the flexibility. So we did recommend those changes. And if you go to the next slide, I don't know if nope, I didn't include them. I can pull them up too. We can look at them if anyone wants to, but they're in the proposed order in the red line changes. So the certificate holder also asked that we update and modify the threatened and endangered species condition 1. It was an area that we did consult with Oregon Department of Agriculture on the preliminary. We also did our background research on how this condition came to be and what happened with it. And I think what I would say is, when the site certificate was split, all of the conditions were carried over into each site certificate. Whether or not they were really applicable is a second question. And so for this one, it's important to understand that when we went back and looked at the final order on Bake Oven and the site certificate split, the only area that had not been pre-surveyed for T&E was the transmission line. And so the intent of the original condition was that unsurveyed areas would be surveyed for the Tide Valley milk vetch, which is the only T&E plant of concern. And they were in the construction of the transmission line during Bake Oven and Daybreak. There's really no unsurveyed areas associated with the transmission line with Sunset. So what we did was we amended that condition based up, we're recommending that you amend the condition, but we did it based upon our review of the certificate holder's request that we do so. And we've clarified that it's prior to construction, they need to do that only in any areas that were not previously surveyed. And there may be very little of that for this facility because the majority of it was in that transmission line. But if there's any area that has not been surveyed for Tide Valley milk vetch, they still have to do it. But it caveats that it's the unsurveyed areas and not the whole thing. Next slide. So this is the removal fill, and the certificate holder requested changes to the removal fill condition that we put in the draft proposed order. And this was an interesting one because it's one of these where we evaluated their request, and based on our evaluation, we actually don't agree with the reasons that they asked that it be changed. However, based upon our deeper dive into the history of it and also where we're at with the removal fill regulation and what it actually requires, we are recommending some modified language in that condition from the DPO to the proposed order. And basically, it's to demonstrate that if a removal fill permit is required, that they get one, because they have done a wetlands delineation and their intent is to avoid. So if they proceed as planned, they will not need a removal fill permit. And that's really what our standard is about, is do they, not whether or not they did a wetlands delineation, but do they need a removal fill? And so, and they have done an expired wetlands delineation. So that's the change that we're recommending based upon our evaluation of the certificate holder's comments on the draft proposed order. And we've made that in red line under the removal fill condition in the proposed order. So here's the language. So I'll just let council have a moment to read it. If you have any questions or comments about it, it would be helpful for us to know. If there's any changes that you would want to see made to that, it would also be helpful for us to know.
Councillor Byer?
And is this consistent with what we've heard from Department of State Lands?
Yes.
Thank you.
I don't have a comment. Councillor Devlin, Councillor Perry, Councillor Grail, Councillor Imes.
I have none. Thank you. This is Marcy.
No, no comment at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Councillor
Are we
Devlin.
ready for a motion? Oh, no.
Not quite yet.
We're almost there.
Yeah,
All right, next slide. Okay, and then the final thing that I think we're going to cover is just, and I talked a little bit about it, is that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife did submit written comments on the draft proposed order, and specifically on the proposed sheep grazing. They have told us in meetings they're developing some kind of internal document on BMPs and sheep grazing. They don't know when it will be done or when it will be available, but they incorporated a lot of that into the letter. So while it's not official ODFW policy, it's signaling where they're going with it and what they're concerned about. And so they've included what are best management practices. And what we have done is we took those BMPs and we basically have incorporated them into the draft amended noxious weed plan that's attached to the proposed order. So we didn't make changes to the condition language because there was already something in there referencing that. So it provides more specificity on what ODFW wants to see. And we've attached that to the noxious weed plan. So it's going to be part of that final plan. And it also captures in time those BMPs so that the certificate holder also understands. And it all has to be finalized. So again, it's going to require coordination and approval from us, the department, and also buy-in from ODFW on what they come up with. Next slide. I think I already talked about that. So it's basically the changes that we made. So back to Council Member Devlin's question. This is my last slide. So just saying, so kind of a reminder. Oh, okay.
Counselor Imes.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick question. I think it was under organizational expertise where the certificate holder is asking for the language to change for their on-site manager to promptly versus 72 hours.
Yes.
And I just thought that was interesting because we talk a lot about specificity, and changing it to something that's not specific can sometimes not go well. So I think I understand the thinking on maybe giving them some more time because 3 days is kind of short. So, but would the council consider actually putting a specific amount of time versus just the word promptly? So I guess I'm recommending that we do put more specificity there.
So Councilmember Imes, as just a clarification, I mean, you could recommend that we reject that request and just leave it at the 72 hours, or and we will make that change. Or if there's some other time frame that you want.
It sounds like they just want a little more time, which is understandable. But I think my point is that we remain to be consistent with being specific in our language.
Thank you, Counselor. I'm actually jumping off, if I may, from that. I thought it a bit odd too. But I think Counselor Imes' comment about specificity is important. But this is something that certainly the site certificate holder has full control over and knows. And so I didn't quite understand. We've hired a manager. Just give us the name. Why the, need for promptly, which and maybe it's less than 72 hours they're talking about, but
Yeah, it does introduce a certain amount of ambiguity. And
just something they know.
yeah, I mean, I think I'll look to Todd at like what point we should have this conversation. Should I go through this slide and then they can deliberate? And then this could be part of that, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of at the deliberation stage right now
Right,
anyway,
'cause this
so
was my last
we really,
slide.
at that point, you got through all of your slides. I think, there's no motion yet, but I mean, you can talk about it beforehand, and then somebody can make whatever you sort of decide, or you're kind of moving towards, somebody can make that motion. Whether it's
Okay.
to go with what's in the proposed order or reject it, as Kate said, and then retain the 72-hour,
Okay.
or make some other kind of specific, time frame.
Okay, so we can have the discussion after the motion and second, right?
Or now,
Right. Pardon?
you can do it now.
Okay. Yeah, we have the discussion now.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll continue for just a bit. Counselor Byatt?
I would be willing to make a motion and then have the discussion. I move that we adopt the amendments in the proposed order as reflected in the staff report, with the exception of the organizational expertise condition, and retain the original language requiring notification of a change in the compliance officer position to a 72-hour notification, with the understanding that the other proposed changes and the conditions in the amended request are adopted. That was not very graceful, but
I
Clear.
understood
second the
it.
Just for clarification, you're essentially retaining the original.
yes.
Okay. I mean, which is fine. You're rejecting what was in the proposed order,
Yes.
but you're going back to what was in the draft proposed order and then the original site certificate.
Well,
Thank you.
there are some other, okay, so there's two changes to that organizational expertise, condition 7. One is that clarification of the individual responsible for compliance and their terminology for it. So I would say you'd accept that part and just strike or reclaim the 72-hour time frame in that condition.
That
Okay,
is exactly my
Okay.
intent. Thank you.
okay. Yes. That was my
That's how I
interpretation.
understand. Thank you, Councilor Devlin. And I just want to comment on one that I appreciate council's review of the site certificate holders request for the amendment to the general expertise and removing violations. And I appreciate council's your work in relating it to the rules. I just want to say how important that word may is there. They have an expert on site supposedly that is supposed to be watching for the conditions we set in, and they know best if there may be a violation. So I appreciate rejecting that change. So any other comments? I think Councilor Imes, did I hear you wanting to speak?
No, I was just gonna second Ann's motion, but it sounds like Counselor Devlin already did that, which is great.
He did. He did indeed.
Thanks.
Madam Chair, I would be willing to just take Councilor Imes' second and I'll withdraw mine so it can be her final
There.
answer.
Councilmember, so done. Can we reflect that in the? It's already perfect.
Okay,
Perfect.
thanks.
And so with that, if we're ready to vote, Mr. Secretary, do you want to take the vote?
Katie Imes,
Yes.
Richard Devlin,
Yes.
Cindy Condon,
Yes.
Ann Byer,
Yes.
Patty Perry,
Yes.
Marcy Grail.
Yes.
Motion carries, Vice Chair Condon. And good job today.
Thank you very much. And if there is no more business for the council, the
Oh, what?
the time is now, since my glasses are working, 11:44, and the October 23rd, 24th, 2025 meeting of the Energy Facility Siting Council is now adjourned.
And
Thank
just-
you.
And just one last note to say, again, bon voyage to Councilmember Imes, and
Yes.
thank you for everything that you've done for us.
She
Yes.
worked
Thank
into
you
the
all.
last minute.
Oh, and sorry, one final note, just literally hot off the message kind of presses, Tom has filed the amendment rules.
Oh,
Yes. Thank you. Progress. Progress.
So as soon as the vote was made, he hit press.
Fabulous.
Thanks, Tom.
And again, thank you, Councillor. Hopefully we'll see you online or otherwise as a private person in the audience.
Yes, I will probably check in every now and then just to see how things are going. And I want to take this opportunity to welcome Counselor Perry. Sorry I couldn't be there in person to greet you. You're in really good hands. So I know it's a lot to take in right now, but the staff and the council are all very welcoming, and so good luck to you.
Councillor Perry?
Thank you, Katie. It is a little bit overwhelming, and I feel like I'm in just really absorbing mode today on getting up to speed on all of these projects so I can help. Appreciate it.
And thank you to staff and everybody who
Oh,
participated
yeah.
today, and those of
Yeah.
you that have sat here for at least today and possibly an evening. So thank you.